Hi, welcome to another episode. Please hit the subscribe button and let's dive in. Reports by the Times of Israel indicate Hamas tried to sneak its fighters out of the Gaza Strip in ambulances that evacuated dozens of wounded Palestinians to Egypt earlier this week, a senior Biden administration official said. Hamas had compiled a list of the seriously wounded that it wanted to evacuate from Gaza for treatment in Egypt, along with thousands of foreign nationals looking to flee the enclave. The list was then vetted by Egypt and the United States, which found that a third of the names on it were of Hamas fighters, the administration official said, adding that the list was rejected. None of the 76 wounded Palestinians who were ultimately evacuated in ambulances out of Gaza were members of the terror group. Meanwhile, two senior Israeli officials told the Times of Israel that Israeli inspectors uncovered, hidden in an aid truck, several oxygen concentrators meant to aerate the tunnels operated by terror organizations in Gaza. These weren't for use in the hospitals, but below them. That's why they were smuggled among boxes of cookies, one of the senior Israeli officials said, adding that the entire truck in which the oxygen concentrators were found was barred from entering Gaza. They did not disclose which organization was responsible for sending the truck. Since Egypt opened its Rafah crossing into Gaza 11 days ago, several hundred trucks filled with humanitarian aid have been able to enter Gaza following inspections by both Egyptian and Israeli authorities. The trucks first enter Egypt, where they undergo an initial round of inspections. They then are driven into Israel through the Nitzana crossing, where they are inspected by Israel's Kogat military liaison, before being sent back to Egypt and driven into Gaza through the Rafah crossing. A second Israeli official told the Times of Israel, saying the format was agreed upon after extensive talks between Israel, Egypt, and the United States. Israel has thus far rejected growing calls to allow in-fuel, expressing concerns that Hamas will divert it to power its tunnels. IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi said Thursday that Israel would allow fuel to enter Gaza via the Rafah crossing should it determine that hospitals have run out of fuel. Shortly after Halevi's comments, the Prime Minister's office issued a terse statement noting only that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not approved the entry of fuel into Gaza. The senior Biden administration official also said Friday that Israel significantly refined its original military plan for its war against Hamas following talks with the U.S., pressed on whether Washington is having discussions with Israel about the growing numbers of civilian casualties. The senior official insisted that the U.S. is asking hard questions and constantly asking and ensuring there's clarity about the objectives they're seeking. They have significantly refined what originally was their plan, the official said in a phone briefing with reporters on condition of anonymity. The senior official said that calling for a ceasefire after the October 7 onslaught by Hamas, in which terrorists killed some 1,400 people and took at least 240 hostages, would not be the right policy for the U.S. to take. A ceasefire depends on the Israelis feeling secure and ensuring something like this cannot happen again, the official said. A pause, on the other hand, would allow for the safe passage of civilians and for more flow of aid into Gaza. The official noted that 100 trucks entered Gaza on Thursday and said the U.S. looks to see that significantly ramp up over the coming days. The official also revealed that Israel agreed to a humanitarian pause on October 20th to secure the release of 2 American hostages from Hamas captivity. The administration official explained that negotiators needed to receive assurances from Israel and Hamas that the hostages would be able to travel safely for what was not a short distance to reach the border from where they were being held in Gaza. There was a time period for that, and it went like clockwork to get them out, the official said in reference to what they refer to as a trial humanitarian pause. The senior administration official said a much longer humanitarian pause will be required if a deal is struck to bring about the release of 240 hostages. A framework to get the hostages out of Gaza is very much ongoing, the official said, without providing further details. The network is made up of tunnels, where most Hamas fighters are likely living alongside stockpiles of weapons, food, water, and, now, more than 240 Israeli hostages. Parts of the tunnels are large enough for vehicles to drive in them. The Israeli military first launched an intense air attack targeting these tunnels and has now sent in ground troops to destroy them. Eliminating the tunnels would go a long way toward breaking Hamas's control over Gaza. Tunnels have existed under Gaza for years, but after Israel withdrew its forces and settlers from Gaza nearly 2 decades ago, Hamas vastly expanded the underground network. Hamas has a long history of terrorist violence. Both the U.S. and the European Union consider it a terrorist group, and the tunnels allow its members to hide from Israeli air attacks. Israel created further incentives for tunnel construction by tightening the blockade of Gaza after 2007. The main rationale for the blockade was to keep out weapons and related material. But Israel's definition is so broad that the blockade also restricted the flow of basic items. In response, Gazans have used the tunnels which extend south into Egypt, which they refer to the hundreds of miles of tunnels as the metro. Egypt's government has also viewed the tunnels as a security threat. A decade ago, Egypt tried to destroy some tunnels along its border with Gaza by dumping sewage into them and leveling houses that concealed entrances, as Joel Roskin, a geology professor in Israel, said. The battle over the tunnels is a major reason that this war already has a high civilian death toll. More than 2 million people live above the tunnels, a layer of human life between many Hamas targets and Israeli missiles. Hamas has hidden many weapons under hospitals, schools, and mosques, so that Israel risks killing civilians and facing an international backlash when it fights. Hamas fighters also slip above and below ground, blending with civilians. These practices mean that Hamas is responsible for many of the civilian deaths, according to international law, as David French, a Times opinion writer and former military lawyer, explained. Deliberately putting military resources near civilians and disguising fighters as civilians are both violations of the laws of war. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, has said Israel is also violating international law by continuing to bomb southern Gaza, partly to destroy tunnels after first ordering people to evacuate there for safety. While Israel says its strikes are precise, Palestinians say that the bombing has felt vengeful and unfocused. One man lost 45 members of his extended family, including a month-old boy. Overall, Hamas says, at least 8,000 people have died in the war, and the UN has confirmed the deaths of at least 2,360 children. One issue is that bombs that hit tunnels can still kill civilians through a kind of aftershock. When bombs and as its ground incursions continue, the toll will surely grow. The more than 200 hostages held by Hamas, likely in the tunnels, will also be at risk. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that they have unique solutions to reach all the tunnels and dismantle them underground, and we are ready to do it, in comments to troops of the elite Yahalom Combat Engineering Unit. The advance into Gaza City came a day before U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Israel, and as global pressure mounted to enact a humanitarian pause in fighting, as well as boosting the amount of aid crossing via Rafah. Before his departure, Blinken said he would be seeking concrete steps to minimize harm to Gaza civilians during his trip to the region, which included a stop in Jordan. Meanwhile, Israel has urged its citizens to reconsider trips abroad and to exercise extra caution if already out of the country, citing an increase in hostility toward Jews and Israelis over the present conflict with Hamas in Gaza. Life-threatening assaults, anti-Semitism, and incitement have been significantly rising in many countries. A joint statement from the Prime Minister's office and the Foreign Ministry said, since Israel launched its campaign in Gaza. Thanks for watching, and see you again in another episode of World Formatics.